Hello everyone, this is Aussies Elect and I am here today with Sormon, a special guest. Hello.
Hello.
He has his own YouTube channel, check it out. Tell them a little bit about what you do.
Basically, I was a big fan of the YouTube channel Mr. Beat in America, who did a video on all the American elections, and so I've basically done a video series on all of the Australian elections, well, the federal ones, from 1901 to 2019, and obviously soon to be 2022. Along with that, I do a bit of other political stuff. I live stream some of the state elections, and I also am doing a series currently looking at our recent prime ministers.
Yep, so everyone go check him out. I got him on this video because he is a South Australian. I'm sort of a South Australian. Like I've lived in South Australia for a couple of years, but I'm from New South Wales and currently I'm in Thailand. Sormon is you've lived in South Australia all your life, right?
No, actually, I've only lived in South Australia since 2006, but both my parents are from South Australia. I myself am actually a Queenslander, but I haven't lived there since I was a baby. So I would say I'm mostly a South Australian, even though I haven't exactly lived here all my life.
All right. So this election coming up, it's the first term of the Liberal government, who only got
Yep.
in 2018.
Yes, they
Um,
did.
yes, and they actually got in with a swing against them because of there was like like the way that the seats were redistributed before that.
So let me go into a bit of a history of my state. So South Australia, for a long time, had a very terrible electoral system called the Playmander system. It was called Playmander after Premier Thomas Playford IV, who was our premier at the time. In fact, he's actually the longest-serving premier in Australian history, longer than even like Joh Bjelke-Petersen and Robert Menzies. And he basically benefited from the fact that country people got twice the amount of voting power that the city did, and he governed for 30 years until about the 1960s, when his successor, a guy by the name of Steele Hall, abolished that system and made a sort of one person, one vote system. The problem is, since then, the electoral system has flung the other way. It's no longer a pro Liberal system, it's now a pro Labor system, because basically he who wins Adelaide wins the entire state. And so this culminated in 2014. So in 2014, the Labor Party was going to lose. They were basically predicted to lose because they weren't polling very well, but they managed to win because they managed to just pick off those few Adelaide seats to hold the majority. And so going into 2018, there was a big seat redistribution to try and, well, basically help the Liberals win because they'd won the popular vote. And that's what happened in 2018. Basically, the Liberals went into 2018 already winning the election. They then proceeded to have a swing against them, but it wasn't big enough to prevent them losing the election. So, yes, that's why there is this weird situation in South Australia where our current government technically won from opposition with a swing against.
Yeah, and what it's looking like for this election, based on like the little bit of opinion polling we have, is perhaps the Liberal Party losing on their first term. We've got a opinion poll from Newspoll that came out. I think it was like yesterday or the day before, which has the LP on 53% and the Liberal Party. I shouldn't say coalition because the National Party is different in South
Yes,
Australia. Yeah,
there is a national party here, but it's mostly dead.
yeah. I hear her. It hasn't really. They didn't contest last election. They're probably not going to be in this one either. They are registered, interestingly enough, but they're not contesting as far as I know. Yeah, so
Yes.
the LP had 53, and then 51 was another poll, which was a couple of weeks ago. So it does look like the Labor Party according to polls, are going to take back. But like, there's been opinion polls like previously, which have indicated something similar. So, say there was this opinion poll from Reachtel back in 2018, a couple of days before the election, and had a Labor head on 52%. So like, I mean, it helps the Labor Party that they have not one but two opinion polls, which are on their side. We never know until the election day.
South Australia is probably the most urbanized state in the entire Commonwealth. So basically, if you can win Adelaide, you basically win the entire state. So the problem that the Liberals face is they are likely going to win their country seats, like the Eyre Peninsula, the Outback, the Southeast. They're going to win that with giant 80% margins. but then Labor's just going to win by small margins in the city seat and end up forming government. So basically, they don't actually even need 50% of the vote to win. They just need to make sure they pick off those individual seats. And so the fact that the polls are showing them ahead in the two-party preferred, it should be a big warning to Marshall that he is definitely going to be in the fight for his life come this election.
So let's take a look at some of the closest seats. With a swing of only 2%, Labour can take back 4 seats, and that will give them the magic 24 to win government. And those seats are King on a margin of 0.8%, Newland on a margin of 0.2%, Adelaide on a margin of 0.8%, and Elder on a margin of 2%. It's going to be hard for them to grab any more seats because the next one has a margin of 6.2%. And looking at the opinion polls, it's only looking like a swing of about 4 or 5% at the maximum.
But I also remind you, swings are never uniform. Some swings are always going to swing towards the Liberals. Case in point, one of the big policies the Labor opposition is pushing is they want to bring back the Clipsal. So in Adelaide, there was a street race called the Clipsal 500 that got shut down due to the pandemic. Labor wants to bring it back, but a lot of people in the eastern suburbs who have to deal with the traffic blockades that street race causes are not going to be happy about it. So I wouldn't be surprised if, in seats like Norwood or Dunstan, the Premier's own seat, you'll see things towards Liberals. So to say that seats like, I don't know, what's the seat that's at 5%? That's...
Colton is on 6.2%, and
yeah.
that's in the western suburbs. That's
yes.
like
So something like Colton. I live in the western suburbs, so I know a bit about Colton. Don't be surprised if that seat has a swing of the 6% needed for Labor to win. Because remember, we're a reasonably small state here. We're nowhere near as big as Victoria or New South Wales, and so with a lot less people need to change their mind for very big swings to occur. So I don't want to necessarily say that outside of the 4 seats, Labor has no chance of winning anything. And I also think the Liberals might actually be trying to win some seats themselves. Like Labor has some seats they're holding on narrow margins.
the only seat though that the Labor Party are sort of hanging it on to slightly is Mawson, because the next one is 3.5%. So Mawson is going to be basically the Kangaroo Island seat. That's going to be their sort of primary defensive location, but really the battleground will be on these Adelaide seats, mostly northern Adelaide seats, plus there's a couple of other ones like Hartley and Colton, and both still sort of in the northish of Adelaide.
So basically, Steve Marshall is the member for Dunstan, which ironically is actually a famous Labor name after a famous Labor premier. He came I can't remember exactly when he came to lead the Liberal Party, but I knew it was before the 2014 election. So he led the Liberals through the 2014 election, and then obviously he led them into government in 2018. His time as Premier has been somewhat uneventful. If you compare him to something like Scott Morrison, who's been full of a lot of controversies and stuff, Stephen Marshall has been quite the dull candidate, which is why I find some of these polling results quite strange, because I personally haven't had huge issues with Stephen Marshall. I am normally a Labor voter, but even I generally don't have huge issues with Marshall. The big issues I know people have had with him was his decision to privatise the railway network. His decision to close the Clipsal 500, I know, annoyed some people.
The ramping thing is like whenever you go in South Australia, you always see like ambulances driving around with chalk on the windows saying, Marshall's defunding the health system, and
yeah,
this is all Marshall's fault and stuff like that.
I know famously, shortly after coming to power, there was a big crime talk in the southern suburbs where basically the police came there and wanted to talk about what the current state of police enforcement and other sorts of things there, and the Liberals police minister forgot to show up. Now, that could also be part of the fact that the Liberals hadn't been in power for 16 years in the state and weren't used to doing government things. But there's just other things, as you were saying, with the ramping crisis. Why some like to point out that it started under Labor. The fact that we've been 4 years under the Liberal government and they haven't, they haven't even seemingly addressed it. Like there is seemingly, I think now that the election's starting up, we're starting to see the Liberals propose more policies, but it's just a general idea that we weren't doing anything to face the future. We were just kind of sitting around doing nothing. And this also comes to the infrastructure projects. Basically, in just the last 4 years of Labor before Marshall came in, we had the massive Torrens to Torrens development where we basically turned South Road from a city street into a major thoroughfare to get traffic from the north to the south of the city. We saw the expansion of the trains from Nollunga to Seaford. Massive expansions in the tram. The tram network used to only go as far as Victoria Square, and now it goes right up into the north part of the city. The Royal Adelaide Hospital has been a big one. There's just been so much stuff being built and so much development in the city. And since the Liberals have taken over, it's been basically nothing. They haven't really proposed new things. And the one thing they have proposed, which has been quite controversial, was their big basketball stadium near the convention centre, which has soon been picked up by the Labor Party as an attack, saying, why are you building a basketball stadium when there is a ramping crisis going on? That's definitely been one of the focal points going into this election.
Going to what you said about the infrastructure, I remember going to, I believe it was in 2020, it was like a town hall, it might have been 2019, it was a town hall about transport in Adelaide, where the transport minister was attending, and basically, like, throughout the whole meeting, he was just like, people were like asking him, "Is anything going to be built?" And he's like, it costs a lot of money, and I think we should take away these bus routes because they're not doing very well, and like trackless trams are the future, so we shouldn't be building more tracks for these trams, like blah 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 blah. So they have a very sort of uninspired vision when it comes to infrastructure, I find. I think what the big one was, the big election issue was South Australia's decision to open the borders in December, whilst states like Western Australia kept their borders closed. When basically South Australia had almost zero COVID cases, they decided that they would open the borders because they'd reached a certain percentage of vaccine, and a lot of people saw it as Stephen Marshall, rushing too much to appease like Scott Morrison's, will of open up everything, let it rip.
I do have some class concerns over the opening of borders, where I was worried that one of the things is a lot of lower income and working class people just don't leave the state. A lot of my friends that I know, they've never left Adelaide, or the most they've gone to like Mount Gambier or something. Whereas I think a lot more upper class people, or people who are more wealthy, they often do travel interstate a lot. And I do sometimes worry that these border openings were done to appease the more upper class citizens who obviously have the Premier's ear, at the expense of more lower working class people who don't travel as much. And I do think that might be one of the big factors factoring into this.
Like, it was really a move to help the economy, and I guess to help people who are coming, to and fro in South Australia, and for people who just kind of just like to stay in the state, just chill there. Then those people, they had no real benefit of the state opening up, especially if they had no relatives who were interstate.
Yeah.
So
I guess I don't want to disregard like people who did really want to come to South Australia. Like I know people who, like I have friends who have family who live in WA and have been very upset with not being able to see their families because of the border closures. And obviously, when people say, "Well, just do the quarantine." Well, I'm sorry, but like 2 weeks quarantine is an extreme task to ask. That means if I wanted to visit my family there for a week, I'd have to go for 5 weeks. I'd have to go 2 weeks there, visit them, and then 2 weeks quarantine back. That just is very inconvenient. People just can't do it. So I do respect that there is aspects of lifting the border, and I think a lot of people are saying that the border had to be open, but I think people are saying perhaps it should have been done at a later date.
Yeah, and I think also the Morrison government is perhaps quite on the nose in South Australia, and that might be affecting polls as well. Sort of that anger about Scott Morrison is coming forward in the state, but that's just pure speculation. I have no idea if that's actually affecting things
again,
or not.
When it comes to federal implications, obviously, as you know, our federal Liberal government is very unpopular right now. The aspect that would be affecting the state Liberal government is a bit unsure. The reason why I say that is because in 2017, Labor won the biggest majority ever in Western Australia, and Labor did extremely well in Queensland in 2016. So, no, 2017 as well. So, in both that year, Western Australia and Queensland saw massive results for Labor at the state level. And then when the 2019 federal election came, those states went massively federally for the Liberal Party. So again, it's one of those reasons where you really think there is a distinction between the two. The one area where there might be crossover is depends on how much Stephen Marshall has tied himself to Scott Morrison. Until recently, I think our premier has done a good job. Being a Liberal state, we haven't seen the wrath of Scott Morrison that a lot of the Labor states have faced. You just need to look back to 2020 and 2021 to see massive conflicts occurring between the Labor state governments and the federal Liberal government, which you just haven't seen here because we're a much smaller state than those states, and B, we have a Liberal government. Scott Morrison didn't have any partisan reasons to attack our government.
All right, let's talk about independence. Yeah, so if we look at like the current seat composition, there's actually there's four of them in regional South Australia and two of them in Adelaide. I believe ones that were elected as independents are the seat of Mount Gambier and I believe the seat of Frome. Yeah, also the seat of Florey was elected.
Yes. So Frances Bedford was elected as a independent. So she lost pre-selection in the lead up to the 2018 election. And then but then ran as an independent and won. So yeah, she was an independent. So she was independent. So was Jeff Brock, I think it is, in Frome, and I forget the Mount Gambier MP's name. Troy Bell, I think. Yeah, Troy Bell. There was a big scandal a while ago where basically several Liberal MPs that represented country seats were taking travel allowances despite spending most of their time living in Adelaide. And it was a big scandal that resulted in several of them being kicked out of the party, which is partly why the Liberals lost their majority. So we didn't actually mention this. The current government, the current Marshall government, is actually running as a minority, which could also be another factor going into this election, that they've kind of been seen as a bit dysfunctional.
Yeah, so in order for them to win back government, they'll have to win back these independent seats, as well as they'll put them on 25 if they manage to do that and not lose any other seats. And they need.
But again, it's quite hard because I'm not sure about other states, but I know in South Australia we have a thing for independence. For instance, I think Troy Bell in Mount Gambier was a pretty disgraced MP. I believe he left the Liberal Party because of a controversy, yet he was still able to win the seat back despite that controversy, showing that his power as an independent outweighed the he got kicked out by an ICAC allegation. So the fact that he went down for corruption and still got re-elected shows that independents do have a strong chance of winning their seats, especially if we do get a minority government, which is a possibility. A lot of people will want the independents because they have to get courted. I think it was Jeff Brock in Frome got a massive amount of money thrown to Port Pirie by the Weatherall Labor government in 2014 so that he would support their government. So Port Pirie was really happy that they had an independent representing them because basically they got huge amounts of concessions thrown their way. And so a lot of these other seats with independents will likely have a pretty decent shot of being re-elected, even if they are somewhat controversial figures.
Right. So yeah, there's a chance that that all of these people will win their seats back. We want to talk about one person in particular, which is the current independent for Florey. So after there was a recent redistribution, somewhere I think it's like a hospital at Tea Tree Gully or something, where she has her campaign centered around. That got moved over to, it got redistributed to a seat of Newland. So now she's jumping over to try to win the seat of Newland. So this seat here is almost certainly going to go back to the Labor Party, which is what it would be if it wasn't for her. And it's more of a question of whether or not she can win the new seat of Newland, which is the seat, the most marginal seat in the country at 0.2%.
So yeah, St Newland is likely going to be the most interesting seat to look at this election. Although now saying that it's probably going to be won by one party by a huge margin, we'll be like, what were we thinking? But either way, it's a marginal seat. It's very much a three-way contest between the Labour Party, the Liberal Party, and obviously Frances Bedford herself. Um, if I had to put money down, I would probably say the Labour Party, but again, it could go either way. It often, with the proportional voting system we have, a lot of the time it's also who comes third and who comes second that can often determine where an election goes.
Yep.
And it would also depend if Frances Bedford herself, if she's going to tell her voters to preference the Liberal Party
I can
or the
imagine
Labour Party.
that she will not tell them to preference either, like because she doesn't want to, lose one.
Because she
She
probably
is
wants to.
known to being progressive though. Like she is an ex-Labor member.
But
So
she's also got bad history with the Labor Party due to pre-selection disagreement. She
yeah,
probably would preference the Labor Party, although you're right, she could also just not hand out how to vote cards and just hope that she can get in off the back of all the other parties preferencing her
yeah.
over
I think that's probably
each other.
what's going to happen. So please also explain what's going on in Sturt.
Okay, so Stewart is going to be one of the most interesting cases because what happened is for a long time the township of Port Pirie, which was I think Jeff Brock's major base, was all in the seat of Frome. But due to a redistribution, Frome has been moved out of the area, and now Port Pirie has been put into the seat of Stewart. Stewart has been held by the Liberal Party for a very, very long time. And so basically, there is, and that seat is held by Dan Van Holst Pelican. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's, I believe, the deputy premier. Um, his primary voting base comes from Port Augusta, where he gets a large number of votes. In fact, he won that seat very comfortably in 2018 with over 70% of the vote. And so it's kind of coming down to this interesting case of sort of Port Augusta versus Port Pirie. So we've got Jeff Brock coming from Port Pirie, where he's very popular, and Dan Van Holst coming from Augusta, where he's very popular. It'll be a very interesting contest in that seat to see which one of the two townships is more passionate about their candidate over the others.
So yeah, as you can see here now, Port Augusta and Port Pirie are both in the same seat, in the seat of Stewart. So that's why that competition is going on.
I don't know what Jeff Brock's chances are. Like again, obviously Jeff Brock was never on any Port Augusta based polling booths before, and also all that whole area. A lot of them might be like, "Oh, I remember that guy from 2014 when he was the kingmaker in the Labor government. Oh, I like him." Or if they're just like, "Who's this random independent guy? I'm not voting for him." So it's a really like no two party preferring results going to explain what's going to happen up there, and no one ever polls individual seats. So reality is we really won't know what's going to happen up there until the election occurs.
So I'm now we're going to get into the time where we're just going to do our little predictions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's going to be really difficult. Like there really isn't that much opinion polls, in South Australia. But like if I was to, put money on it, I'd say that the Labor Party would win all of the marginal seats, which will put them on 24. Um, and they'll only just scrape by and get government, and then some of these independents, I think probably Cavill, Naranga, or Frome will go to the coalition, or the Liberal Party, sorry, and then the independent will take Stewart. Oh, there's also Waite, I think, which will go back to the Liberal Party. It's do you have a similar prediction?
So when it comes to this election, it's basically going to come down to how much the public wants change. Like, as I say, I've had a pretty decent time over the last 4 years. Even during the height of the pandemic, I was able to manage through the lockdowns and stuff. So I'm generally feeling quite fine. But I do know that there is a lot of discomfort out there in the community from the lockdowns, from the ramping crisis. And I still don't know just how much of an impact that will play into this election, how much people are angry or just fed up or just want change. The polling seems to indicate that they do want change and there is a movement for change, and that has built me confidence that there is a chance Labor could win. It does feel strange that we had 16 years of Labor and only 4 years of the Liberals, and we immediately want to go back to Labor again.
But it
It
does it does
does,
happen. It happened in Queensland, for example.
yeah, but that was with Campbell Newman, who was an absolute disaster. Like, I wouldn't say Stephen Marshall was anything to what Campbell
Yeah,
Newman was
it's
like.
also really weird. Peter Malakanasis.
Malinowskis.
Sorry. He's
Don't
surprisingly
worry, you're better than Sky.
he's
Don't listen to how they pronounce it.
he's probably he's for some reason um quite popular. Like there was the new news poll that came out
Yes.
the other day, had him ahead of Stephen Marshall by 7 points as
Which,
preferred
that, just
premier.
to be honest, that's probably the biggest evidence you would know that Labor is in a very good seat, because very rarely is the opposition leader considered a better premier. Like, despite all the garbage going on in federal politics, there's been next to no polls showing Anthony Albanese ahead of Scott Morrison. So, like, even despite how bad Scott Morrison is at being prime minister, he is still preferred prime minister. The fact that Marshall isn't preferred premier is a big shocker. Um,
Yeah, and I think that's what makes me think that probably the polls won't turn around if people have this much good favor with Peter Malakanasis.
just call
Mal-
him Peter.
Mr. M.
No. Sorry. Just there was a joke someone saw the other day where it's like presenters who've just figured out how to say Anastasia Palaszczuk's name, trying to figure out how to say Peter Milanowskis' name.
Yeah, I love all these premiers with interesting
Yeah,
last names.
the Labour Party has a lot of I believe Eastern European people that these are refugees from World War II and other like later wars that have moved here, have had kids, and their kids have now joined the Labour Party. So that's why you'll find in the Labour Party there is a lot of people with some very names that you've probably never seen before. Even Anthony Albanese is, I believe, uh,
It's
not a
Italian.
very common name.
It's Italian.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, he's also got a pretty high satisfaction rate. But we're just going to
Yes,
quickly.
he was the only opposition leader to remain popular throughout the pandemic. Every other opposition leader was considered net unfavourable by the public in polls.
I don't exactly know why. Like I have technically met the guy, so I think he does seem like a pretty nice guy. But
I am obviously a Labor supporter, so this is going to be a bit biased, but SA Labor is one of the most craftiest parties out there. It always feels a bit bad. Like they play politics very well. You almost feel a bit mistrusting of them sometimes. But like in 2014, they knew exactly which seats they needed to hold on to win government, and they very much got those seats and held on to those seats. And going into this election, they are very much targeting the 4 seats they need to win. They are not doing massive campaigns out in other seats to just a general swing. They are going straight for those 4 seats. Malinowskis himself has been very crafty at supporting the government on everything he thinks popular, and then going against the government on things that he thinks he can win points off. This has actually even gone to the points where even some of the people I know who are Labor supporters don't like this. He's actually done some very anti-Labor things. For instance, there was a land tax reform. I can't remember the details of it, but generally, if you are someone on the left, you would have supported these reforms. But due to the fact that Malinowskis thought, I can, throw a wedge into the Liberal Party here, he actually opposed the land tax reforms to try and gain support from people that were against it.
That was I also went to another town hall in South Australia about that policy, where there was a lot of really angry Liberal voters who really did not like the land tax changes. And at that time, Peter hadn't made a decision yet on the policy. But I think after going to that, you're right. He brought it in as a wedge issue.
And it's the same thing with the Clipsal 500. He's basically banking off a bunch of motorheads in places like Newland and King being upset that such an iconic street race isn't done anymore. And it's just all over. And a lot of the policies are very much aimed at trying to find a niche that everyone thinks about and to go, I really want this to happen. The Labour Party is going to do that. I'm voting for Labour. So, yes, he is a very, very crafty opposition leader. And in fact, I even saw an article once getting up, someone lamenting the fact that he isn't in federal politics leading the federal Labour Party. He's also still very fit. I know that's been one of the things going into this election that the recent... he had recently announced a redevelopment for the Aquatic Centre in which he posed just in some boxer shorts in the pool and definitely got a lot of the ladies I saw from those shirtless photo shoots.
So we're just going to quickly talk about the betting sites. There isn't much on Sportsbet, and I can't easily get around these betting sites because I'm currently not in Australia, so I have to use a proxy website, and it's kind of annoying. But type of government forms at the moment, it's pretty close between all of them. Labor minority is ahead. Actually, sorry, no, Liberal minority is the most favoured one, followed by Labor minority, then Liberal majority, and then Labor majority. But it's all kind of up in the air. There doesn't really seem to be a sort of a sure bet on who's going to win each one. And then when it comes to the sworn-in government, it's almost 50-50. It's got Liberal on 1.87. They're actually ahead on the betting sites, and Labor on 1.9. So if you believe the polls, then you could make some good money by betting on Labor. But yeah, so definitely betting sites aren't really sure which way it's going to go.
Even with the polls and the situation the way they are, I can still see this election going in all four directions. Being Liberals blow out and just do super well. Liberals hold on to what they have and keep the minority. Labor picks up one or two seats and gets the minority. And I also see even ones where Labor blows out and wins a ton of seats, like way more than just the four they're targeting.
They're on a news poll of 53% when they lost by 51-49 last election. Like that's a reasonable swing. So yeah, we could see them edge out a majority.
What would be interesting, and I'm not sure we talked about this yet, is the fact that if this is a win for the Labor Party, this will be a massive upset, not only for the state Liberal government, but the federal Liberal government, who are banking on the fact that every pandemic premier has been re-elected. Fun fact, the last government to lose to the opposition was, ironically, the state Labor government losing to the SA Liberals in 2018. We were the last state to see a change in government. Since that election in 2018, every single government has been re-elected at their election in every state and every territory.
That's pretty interesting. I didn't realize that until now. Yeah, and I mean, it's sort of, especially with COVID, it's sort of easy to see why.
We saw Andrews get re-elected in 2018. We saw Berejiklian get re-elected in 2019. Obviously, Morrison got re-elected in 2019. And then since the pandemic, they've all been re-elected at state and territory levels.
Yeah, and I guess that's why the betting sites sort of are thinking that Liberals still are on top, like they still have it.
We have seen, so interesting, just in some other states, in the Northern Territory, the Labor government did lose seats despite being re-elected in 2020, but they were having a lot of financial issues in the territory. And in Tasmania, the Liberals did win with a swing towards them, but it was a very small swing, and they basically only just held on to power. So it is showing that despite pandemic policies being shown to get your party re-elected, it hasn't been the best for everyone. And most notably, the Tasmanian government, which was a Liberal government, didn't see the same swings that, say, Queensland and especially Western Australia saw in their re-elections.
Yeah, it's definitely not like a surefire way to win. Australians are not that easily pacified, it seems. So final thing I want to talk about is the upper house. So this is the current, this is what seats were elected last election. I think it's pretty safe to assume that the Liberals are going to win 4 seats and so are Labor. Just based on the opinion polls. The question, the Greens will probably win 1, 2. The question is what these last 2 seats will be. So here was an opinion poll that came out the other day for the upper house. It has SA Best on 5%, Polling Hands on Nation on 5%, and the major parties on the same percentage. So based on this, if I was to base it entirely on this poll, I would give SA Best another seat, so they still have some presence.
I have a lot of trouble guessing if SA Best is going to get re-elected, just because the party's basically was built around Nick Xenophon, and he's gone.
Yeah, I think there is sort of a little bit of residue, like not nearly as much as obviously.
Rebecca Sharkey won Mayo in the federal election more based off the fact that she was a popular independent and not because she was part of the Xenophon team. Senators do not have the same recognition, or even in this case, councillors do not have the same recognition that their lower house members do, and that's why I'm just a little skeptical, even with current polling, that SA Best would be able to pick up the one seat. If it
Yeah,
currently stands, I'm having a look at what happened last time. So the Liberals won. So look at the total. So the Liberals won 8 seats with roughly 32% of the vote. So they're probably going to. I mean, they won 4 seats. Labor won 4 seats with 28% of the vote. They possibly could win another one. It'll be
they
interesting. So
could, based on the polling from News Poll, Labor could perhaps pick up another seat, but we also have Pauline Hanson's One Nation on 5% on
mhm.
this poll as well.
Yeah,
So if they do score 5%, I believe that they'll pick up that final seat. Um, and
it would be shocking because we've never had a One Nation member represent our state.
yeah, it would be very weird.
My prediction at the moment, just based off what I'm seeing, is Liberals to win four, possibly five, Labor to win four, possibly five, the Greens will win one. And as for the final seat, I could see potentially One Nation getting it. I could also potentially see SABS might just have enough residual vote to get it. The Greens might get two. Uh, Again, it'd be interesting if One Nation could get that high. I also remind you that One Nation has benefited a lot from anti-lockdown movement.
That's right. Of
Um,
course, yes, that's right. Yeah.
I'm just not sure how much that's going to play into this election with most COVID restrictions being lifted, which is something I was going to mention a bit. In some respects, this election is the first post-COVID election in Australia. Like every election before now, since 2020, has been a COVID election. This, in some respects, is our first post-COVID election, and it's going to be very interesting to see how we view our governments coming out of this pandemic as opposed to viewing them during it.
Yeah, and I think it's going to definitely say something about the upcoming federal election, about like what kind of issues will take place, because COVID isn't on sort of like, it's not the hot topic of how how a government is going to manage COVID.
Like we are a small state. We at the end of the day, it's possible we might see Labor pick up 2 seats, those being Boothby and Sturt on the federal level. So we're probably not going to do much on the election. The result here could have much bigger connotations. Is that the right word? To what's happening on the federal level if a pandemic premier is not able to win re-election. Um, it could send very interesting messages to the federal government that you're not invincible because you were the prime minister during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, I think that's all we really need to talk about. If like another opinion poll comes out that shocks us, I don't know, maybe we'll make a video. But we basically went over mostly everything here.
I'd also be interested if you would like to do a post-election discussion as well.
Yeah, that would be good. Definitely, yeah. Wrap it up after we see the results. Sure. All right. Yes. Thank you very much, Sormon, for joining me. It has been a pleasure to get your input into all of this. You surely knew a lot of things that I did not know. So thank you so much.
It pays to be a local. Thank you very much. I've appreciated being able to be on here. I was able to give your viewers a insightful look into my state's politics and what's currently at stake going into this year's election. I look forward to seeing the results.
All right. Cheers. Good night, everyone.